few housekeeping notes. First of all, I'm used to standing at the back of the church without talking. So if I'm not making sense, raise your hand, but I'm not a public speaker. I do know funeral service really well. Let me introduce Luke. He's at the back, and he's a fellow Catholic. He's a member of Holy Trinity Catholic Church. And if my talk want to take it to the next level, Luke can take care of that for you. Many people have asked me in the past, was your grandfather or father or brother a funeral director? No, none of them were. I'm a funeral director because I was taught as a young child by Irish nuns. Back in the 60s, they didn't have medication for ADD, ADHD. And so you're supposed to be in the 6th grade, but I think that was the 3rd or 4th grade that the nuns sent me out. Mr. Taylor, you're going to go on a funeral and perhaps you're going to be gone all day long. I was gone all day. I didn't get much of an education, but I got a funeral license. The presentation that I have there's 8 things, not 9, not 10, not 11 things, there's 8 things. Be informed about your options that you have available. I'll talk a little bit more about that and we'll be specific about that, but be informed as a group. I would first like to applaud you that you're here because you're here for a reason and it's a good reason. Write it down. You've got it in your brain, write it down and share it with someone that's going to take care of your estate. Don't put it in a lockbox because the lockbox perhaps doesn't get opened until after the funeral has happened. The thing that hurts my feelings the worst is, well, we've gotten the lockbox, but mom's already buried, but she wanted this prayer card, or she wanted this preacher, she wanted this funeral, etc. We want to do the Mass the right way. So write it down and tell the person that's going to take care of it. When I say talk about with your family, some families are happy to talk about it, some are not. I'm amazed at the number of people that maybe the wife wants to talk about it, but the husband doesn't want to talk about it. And the wife knows specifically what's going to happen. My prayer is that he goes before her because she's going to write it all down and have it all recorded. I'm going to start at the bottom of this. If you have the desire for an organ donation, my brother did, but he had done the paperwork in advance. He died and the organs were harvested. There's a lot of paperwork that goes into organ donation, cremation. If you know what cemetery specifically, then you want to have that down as well, because sometimes maybe, how do I say this? Some of the family loves that cemetery, some of the family doesn't love that cemetery. But you want that cemetery, so be sure and write it down. Don't be afraid to ask the prices. Obviously, I'm from Sparkman Hillcrest. I spend a lot of time at Sparkman Hillcrest, but I do funerals at Ted Dickey West, Ted Dickey East, Sparkman and Richardson, Sparkman Crane, etc. So the folks that come into Sparkman-Hillcrest, how do I say this? Money is not an object, and they don't want to know the price. If you want to know the price, you want to say that up front and write it down and have that number. If you want to take it to the next level, besides just writing it down, that's why I introduced Luke, and you want to do a pre-plan, then you can, and it's all locked in that way. Know what benefits apply to you. For instance, someone came to me, not the last presentation, but the presentation before that, and they said, I want to be buried at the National Cemetery. What do I need to do? All you need to do is have your DD-214 available, and once that's available, your Social Security number is enough, but the DD-214 will dictate exactly what's going to happen. If it's a National Cemetery organization, they're going to ask for that, and if that's not available, then they'll go with the Social Security number. They'll call St. Louis, which is the home base for the national cemeteries, and they'll find out if you're eligible to be in that cemetery. I wrote this one down because you want to talk to the parish first. It's not set in stone that you have to, but when we as a funeral director visit with the family, if the funeral's to be the next Monday and it's Thursday or Friday, we don't know if the church is available, so the family might know if the church is available and have already contacted them, but if you have the funeral set, we try to back in as best we can to that. Sometimes, on occasion, especially the last 2 or 3 years, we've been extremely busy. Some of it's been COVID related a couple of years ago, but now it's not. But unfortunately, those that are our age and a little bit above, they're kind of beginning to check out. So we want to make sure that we're doing exactly, and I'm old school enough that if the funeral is set by the church, then we're going to have it somewhere, somehow. Questions that you have? Yes, sir. Hold on just a second. Michael George is coming with the microphone. There you go.
If a person plans to be buried like 200 miles from here, is it possible to have a church service here and in the hometown?
That's a good question. Can a funeral happen in Dallas and the other hometown? And the answer is yes, it can. And sometimes, in some situations, some families want to have that. That keeps the folks that are 200 miles away from traveling to Dallas. But some go to the Dallas funeral and go to the other funeral as well. So yes, it can happen. Sometimes, in some situations, we have a funeral in Dallas and then the burial at the spot. For instance, President Jimmy Carter is going to die. He's going to have a funeral in Plains, Georgia, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and then he's coming back to Plains because that's where he's going to be buried. That's where the grave is, and so he and his wife are going to be in the cemetery there. So there's going to be 3 funerals: Plains, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. It's the National Cathedral in Washington, but he's going to lie in state in the rotunda of the Capitol. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Hold on just a second. Michael George is coming with a, and he hates that I say his name.
Okay, if you've pre-planned your funeral,
Yes.
prepaid, and moved from the area, how difficult or easy is it to, or can you transfer that to another area?
That's a good question. There's two answers. Sometimes folks want to be brought back to where they're quote unquote from, and then we do the funeral. Sometimes they're going to stay right there. Dignity is big enough that we've got locations kind of all over, and if it's a small town, maybe there's a location, but that's definitely something that applies that you want to check out in advance, because it can happen, yes.
Okay. Is there generally like a distance that would be involved in like how far away you move? You know,
A distance
like,
being,
okay, I planned everything and down in Ennis, and then I got married and moved up here.
right,
So what would be the likelihood for me to be able to transfer? So he doesn't have to travel that far south for my funeral. I'm going to be cremated, so it doesn't have to be down in Ennis because the burial will be later.
right. So it's interesting that you're going to be cremated. So is your urn going to be at your funeral mass at All Saints?
No, my body will be at the funeral mass.
Body, and that's a friend of mine, Kay Hogan, has passed away a couple of days ago, and her body is going to be at St. Mark, and then she's going to be cremated, and then she's going to go on the columbarium at St. Mark. So I'm making arrangements for all that. So it can happen,
Okay.
definitely,
Okay, thank you.
without his inconvenience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Briefly, the handout, we have 9 things that you should know about. This one, item number 7 on the handout, know about prearranged services and Medicare. What does Medicare have to do with this?
That's why I had it taken off there, because Medicare gets into a whole different ballgame. So that's the one that I had taken off. And having a wife that's on Medicare, but me being active, I'm not on Medicare, but I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't apply to funerals. That's why I had it removed.
Hey, Chris, over here.
Yes.
Now I know why you look so familiar. Have you got a count on how many funerals you've done?
Somebody asked me, have you kept track of how many funerals you've done? I said, I haven't kept track. So many thousands, but I don't know.
All right, that was the softball. What I'd like to know, and both of my parents passed, my dad had everything arranged without going into more details. So I'd like to know what the advantages are to payment pre-planning. So, hold on. So, want to hear financial, emotional, psychological, practical for family and heirs. So those are my top of mind. And then, honestly, what are the disadvantages? Because I think a lot of people struggle with, should I do this? And so economic disadvantages, clearly there might be some flexibility disadvantages. So can you address those two?
You've answered your own question, the advantages, because the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Her question, because she's going to Ennis, but she now lives in Dallas, there's a few loops that are going to happen for her, and the bottom line is she knows exactly what she wants and what's going to happen. So the only disadvantage that I know of in the grand scheme of things is that you're giving up that money. It's not a huge thing, but the money eventually is going to go to the funeral. The lock-in is that the funeral nowadays, a funeral probably costs $7,000 or $8,000, $10,000 for sure. Years ago, when my dad died, we spent a grand total of $4,000, and he had a really nice funeral. So was there an advantage to that? Yes, because when we knew exactly what it was going to be, and he lived for several years, he brought home the paperwork to the cemetery, and he goes, I was in the 8th grade. He said, son, you'll never see this paperwork, but this is your mom and mine's cemetery paperwork, and it's all going to go in the lockbox, but it's taken care of. So that's good that we as a family, so my brother was alive then, and I called him when the death occurred for my dad, and he came into town, and he said, where's Dad and Mom going to be buried? And I said, Dad's already taken care of that. He said, wow, I didn't know that. So he did.
An assumption,
Wait, I make sure, did I answer all the questions?
Yes, we did. I mean, having gone through it, I think it was a great advantage, and I was trustee of the estate, and it was even better for me.
Yes.
From that standpoint. You still have to deal with all the details and maybe make some decisions, but having that taken care of was hugely helpful. Now, I have not got my own plot because I have no idea in hell where I'm going to get buried.
Right.
Or heaven, excuse me.
Understand. Yes, sir.
Chris, this deals with international. A death occurs in Dallas, cremation in Dallas. Disposition of the cremated remains would be in Brazil, offshore. Is that possible?
Yes, it is very possible. Sometimes some people that know they're going to be cremated, for instance, I had a friend whose father died in Florida, and I said, we can bring your father back, but he's going to be cremated anyway before we have the funeral, and y'all aren't going to see him, so why don't we have him cremated in Florida? Then we don't have to spend the money because it's a weight and cost kind of a thing for the airlines. But the cremated remains are mailed back to us in an urn, so everything was good. So the answer is yes, it can happen.
A follow-up to that, can the urn be transported by air?
Yes.
Passenger or
it
with the
can
passenger's
be.
belongings? Or does it go in the
key,
hold?
the key thing is that the air transportation is that it's an overnight kind of thing. We spend an extra amount of money to transport the urn from point A to point B. So it's done really quickly.
Thank you.
Can you kind of summarize what a normal funeral costs? Forget about Florida, back to Dallas and everything else. What should everyone in this room expect a funeral to cost via a casket or an urn, interment? What does a headstone cost? Kind of give us an idea of what we're looking at.
So there's two versions that if somebody wants to be like she's talked about cremation, if the cremation is going to occur before the Mass, and I have many funerals at All Saints, St. Rita's, St. Joseph, St. Patrick, whatever, and sometimes the family wants the urn there, and sometimes they want the body there. So if the casket is going to be there, then, and they're going to purchase the casket, caskets range in price from an inexpensive casket is right at $1,000 or a little bit less than $1,000, right on up. And the service charge for the funeral director to go to the funeral, and sometimes the family wants to have a rosary or vigil the night before. So the round number to talk about for a casketed remains, and this is inclusive of a cemetery space, it's not unusual for a family to spend $10,000 or $12,000 on the funeral. if a cremation and an urn's going to be involved and no body, then it's not unusual for it to be $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Then there's the cemetery space, because we as a Catholic Church, we want the, how do I say this? The urn to be entombed and urned in a columbarium, and some of the churches have columbariums, and some of the funeral cemeteries have columbariums. And the range of price is from $1,500 up to $100,000. It's not unusual. Oh, the marker. The markers, typically for a single marker for Luke, it's not unusual for a family to spend $1,500 to $2,000 for a marker.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chris. Markers are going to vary from an individual, which could be a 24 by 12, up to a monument, something that is upright. The 24 by 12 would be a flat marker or grass level. Those will range anywhere with the fabrication, the engraving, the installation, typically $1,200 to $1,600. You can go higher depending if you choose a specialty granite to larger monuments that would be in the $5,000 to $10,000 range to large monuments that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's a very individual choice. And it's something that everyone decides within their family what their legacy will be. And so, again, after today is finished, I'm happy to have more individual discussions with anyone who has questions. I'll give it back to Chris. Hope that's helpful.
Did I answer your questions, sir? All right. Question here.
I just want to make a comment. And my first wife died 12 years ago in Michigan, and we had to transport her back here, and we went through all this. I think that the key thing is to plan ahead, and it was totally unexpected, but it's the emotional the emotional pull and drag on that, trying to make those decisions on where you're going to be buried, where's going to happen, how it's going to happen, what kind of headstone, and all that stuff is really stuff that's really a mess.
That's a good point. To your point of why would you do something in advance? If you're here, you already know what the subject matter is going to be. I applaud you all for being here. But to his point, there's some things that you remember, some things that you don't. The thing that hurts my feelings the most is, well, we think Mom liked this saint, so we'll pick this prayer card. We think she liked this prayer, so we'll pick this prayer. We don't know. That's a really good point.
Chris?
Yes.
Chris, Richard had a great question regarding cremation, and I just have a quick story, and then I'm going to throw it to Father Jovita to answer. And then we're going to go to break real quick. But when my mother died, so she was down in Houston, I went to visit my father after she had died, and at the door I went to hug him, and I looked over his shoulder, and there's this white box with my mother's picture on the box on his mantle. And I looked at it, and I said, Dad, tell me that's not my mother up on the mantle there. And he said, yeah, isn't it great, Pard? We've got her right here. And I suggested to him at that time that he talk to his parish priest about the respectful disposition of cremains. So, Father Jovita, if I could ask you to opine on that subject for just a moment, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I do understand, and I know for sure many of us do understand, especially the stand of the Catholic Church when it comes to respectful disposal of the human body. I know it took the church a whole lot of time even to be able to accommodate cremation, and not every part of the world actually still kind of buy into that. I was telling a friend of mine in Nigeria that when I die, I will be cremated. He said, you don't say that. I said, why? He said, we want to see your body whole. So what do I mean by this? The church believes in the respect for human body. And the church believes that the human body should be accorded that respect even at death. So when it comes to the disposal of the human body, the church, yes, gives that permission for cremation, but then even with the cremation, that body should continue to be respected in a very unique way, because we are all created, if we realize, in the image and likeness of God. So disposing the ashes is something that the church believes that should be done in a very respectful way. And scattering of the ashes, oh, maybe because this guy loved this and this, that, we have to do that. The church does not really buy into it, because it is very disrespectful to the human body, which had been the creation of God. So sometimes we need to just be very, very careful and very conscious of it, especially for our loved ones. So I just want to say that, and I don't know if it really addresses the issue.
Father, that's actually a perfect explanation. And, I would like to thank you again. Thank you for having us here. Thank you for your presentation. And Chris, thank you very much for your presentation as well. What we're going to do right now, give Chris a hand if you would, please.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, please, if you would.
Want to introduce Donna, if y'all don't know her, from All Saints, is the funeral coordinator here. If you want to say a few words.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you sitting down and planning this. I meet with a lot of families who have no idea what their parents wanted. I have families who the children are no longer practicing Catholics. So us as Catholics want to let our children know what we want for our funeral mass. I am willing to meet with any one of you, families, your children as well, if you would like. But I would like to meet with the All Saints families. Those of you who are not at All Saints, please check with your pastor and see if you can speak with them and set up a planning. I have 12 families that have planned and have met with 3 of those families because the parents passed away, and we knew what they wanted in their funeral mass. It's very important. Our kids, pray for them, have stepped away. We want to bring them back, and I have met with several families where the children are now back at church. So that's a blessing. Prayers are answered. So please, if you want to meet with me, I will be here afterwards. I have cards and I have sheets for funeral planning here at All Saints.